every 10 years, the state of Arizona redistricts, and you come up with all your legislative districts and your congressional districts. And part of those districts and a part of districting has been based off of race. I mean, that by definition is racist, right?
Republican Senate President and Attorney General candidate Warren Peterson tells KTAR's Mike Broomhead that Arizona should draw up new voting maps after a U.S. Supreme Court ruling this past week that guts the Voting Rights Act. The ruling makes it much harder for voters of color to challenge redistricting plans that allegedly dilute the political power of minority communities. Peterson says the landmark 1965 law designed to remedy racism was itself racist. That was one of two major court rulings this week affecting our elections and how they're carried out. Democratic Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, the state's top elections officer, joins us with his reaction to the rulings. Welcome back to Square Off.
Thanks for having me again.
We just heard Senate President Warren Peterson declare the redistricting law itself racist because it was based on race. What's your reaction?
Well, he didn't actually declare it so. He asked, and part of redistricting has been based off of race. That by definition is racist, right? And he asked the question because he doesn't know the answer. The answer is no, it's not. And if he had been a lawyer for more than 30 days, he would understand the definition it is not racist. What we have is guarantees that were hard fought by the folks who got their heads bashed in at the Edmund Pettus Bridge just because they wanted their voices heard, by millions of Americans across the United States marching for equality in representation. This is a long, long, proud American legacy of making sure that we treat folks fairly and equitably in this country and that their voices are heard. And to walk backwards the way that Senate President Peterson seems to be advocating is really an unfortunate way for this sort of rhetoric of victimhood to be promoted by folks of his political ilk. That is, they feel politically threatened because their policies are failing Americans, and so they've got to blame somebody. Well, instead of blaming themselves, since they're in charge of everything, they're trying to cheat, trying to change the lines, and that's not what the American people want. If you really want to have a fair representation of the voice of all Americans, let all Americans have their voice, including minority communities, including language minority communities, including rural communities, including all communities. And this was a way of really leveling the playing field from some significantly and severely unfair practices over American history. So this is just, again, this is the rhetoric of victimhood, and I think Mr. Peterson needs to just get over it. We're moving forward in this country with or without people like him.
And yet the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 6-3 ruling, says basically mission accomplished. The law did its work. These race-based, or however you want to describe them, the information, the data used to create districts isn't necessary anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, if the analysis is going to be unsophisticated, that's fine. But they said mission accomplished with Dred Scott too, right? They said mission accomplished with a whole bunch of other very problematic, very unfortunate rulings in the past. And the United States of America continues to grow and develop and shift and change. And there are some folks who like it the way it was in the past. But guess what? It wasn't great for everyone in the past. And my contention about this is very clear. When you really want to represent all Americans, you got to have all Americans who are eligible voting. And that's why all we've ever done is try to expand the franchise, make sure everybody has the information they need, and make sure their voices can be heard. Once you get that, you might win elections, you might lose elections, but at least you're listening to the American voter. And that, I think, is what this starts to prevent. And that is why I think this rhetoric of victimhood is dangerous.
So let's bring it home to Arizona. We saw in the aftermath of the ruling, the immediate aftermath, the governor of Louisiana postponed their primaries so they could redistrict. Could the same thing happen here?
This is just like, it's just like the Suns deciding at the middle of Game 3 in the recent playoff series that they were going to change the rules and give the home team a 40-point advantage.
They wish.
They wish, yeah. Right? But you know what? Americans don't like cheaters. And that's what's happening, right? You're in the middle of an election. Ballots are already being cast, and you're going to stop the election. This is unheard of in this country. Now, we have postponed elections for real emergencies like 9/11. They had a couple of week postponement. But in this country, we are so robust. We can take it in the chin once in a while when we suffer political defeats. Trust me, I've won and I've lost, but I've never complained when I lost. And you know why? Because I trust the American voters and I know what a fair fight looks like. And maybe it's the Marine in me, but the fight has to be fair. And what's happening right now, the American people and Arizonans are recognizing as cheating. They want to cheat the system in the middle of the game because they're about to get their tails handed to them. And instead of just playing the fair fight and trying to do better next time, they want to cheat. That's what this is all about. And so I have no sympathy, and I don't think that any of these folks should be, oh, well, you know, maybe the lines were unfair, or maybe this or maybe that. We're in the middle of an election season. You don't change the rules in the middle of the season. In fact, there's a principle out of the Supreme Court called the Purcell Principle, named after my predecessor in office, Helen Purcell. You don't change the rules in the middle of an election. And they're doing exactly that. That to me is just, you know, they're trying to insulate themselves from potential losses. Everybody sees it for what it is. And to the American voters, this is unfair. And as an election administrator, we want to do it fair.
I want to come back to Arizona. Senate President Peterson made some vague remarks about wanting to change the districts. Certainly, he knows what the law here is when it comes to redistricting. And we have a voter-approved law 26 years ago, I think, that was designed to end the kind of gerrymandering we're seeing around the country.
Right. The
So,
Independent Redistricting Commission.
Is there any way that, say, a motivated Republican majority in the legislature could tinker with that?
No, there isn't. And that's because in Arizona, we have this principle, basically, that we have the citizen legislature. And we can do things in Arizona as voters. And we did that in 26 years ago, yeah. And what we did was we said we want to have an independent redistricting commission away from the political shenanigans of the legislature. Let these folks draw the maps. And we have a criterion that specifically talks to a particular set of factors, including that you want to keep contiguous communities contiguous. So you don't have those weird looking, gerrymandered looking lines, right? You want to make sure that those communities of interest, so you have geographic contiguity, you have communities of interest voting together. This is how we fairly represent folks, particularly in Congress. Now, we do have a mixed system because counties actually draw their own lines as to the boards of supervisors. But here's the bottom line. Arizona voters enshrined in our Constitution this independent redistricting commission. And for anybody to say they know better or they think better because they're facing political losses, that's cheating. And we don't abide by cheaters. Win, lose, or draw. You've got rules, follow the rules, especially when it's the people who made those rules. That's how it is in Arizona and in several other states, by the way. So I think we're a little bit insulated from this. It's unfortunate that there's some people out there trying to cheat, trying to change the lines mid-game, which goes against what voters really want.
And to point out, the Redistricting Commission was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court back in 2015.
Absolutely, and they exist in other states too. In fact, Colorado has this balance of kind of two commissions. Michigan's commission, in fact, started because one woman put a Facebook post out there that turned into a statewide movement. That's how they got theirs. The voters out there want politics out of these lines. They want them out of gerrymandering, and Peterson wants to inject himself back in, so we're going to fight against that.
I want to end real quick with the other ruling of the week. The judge here in Phoenix, Susan Brnovich, basically swatted away the U.S. Department of Justice's attempt to get Arizona's voter rolls, sixth state where they lost. I don't want to dwell on the decision, but what comes next? What might the Trump administration do next to perhaps get its hands around Arizona's elections?
Well, when the Department of Justice illegally asked me to turn over sensitive voter data, I told them to pound sand. The court just told them the same thing, and in fact, very interestingly said, you can't come back on this one. She dismissed it with prejudice because to come back would be legally futile, in her words. That's really rough coming from a Trump-appointed conservative judge. What comes next is the potential for an appeal, but here's the thing. If you look at what's happening nationally, there are a variety of different rulings rejecting the DOJ's illegal requests, but the rulings are made in different ways as to different rationale. So the government is losing. This government is losing this case in a whole bunch of different ways in court, and that's really bad for what the request ultimately will look like on appeal.
It looks like they have a friend in Justin Heap, the county recorder. in Maricopa County.
Well,
who has
yeah, they've got friends in
talked to the U.S. attorney. Apparently, is open to handing over some information, though he said he would not hand over voter rolls. How concerned are you about that?
Well, look, I trust the recorder to follow the law. And that's a bold statement coming from a Democrat to a Republican. But look, I know the recorder. We've met. Insofar as some of his other fights, I'm sympathetic to his plight. I held that office at one time. The bottom line is this. Regardless of what anybody feels about politics, when you follow the rules, you're going to be okay. When you follow the law, you're going to be okay. I believe in my heart of hearts that that Recorder Heap is going to follow the law and protect sensitive voter data. As to some of the other information, if the law allows him to turn it over and it's a legal turnover, then who am I to stop it?
Got to end it there. Adrian Fontes, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Bram.
When we